Hello and welcome to Creepy Puppets Presents. I'm your creepy puppeteer, Tommy. Hey, we're experimenting with a new camera angle today. Unfortunately, while I think the sound is better here, the chair certainly squeaks less and it's more comfortable, I can't see my computer monitor from here, so I can only sort of approximate that I am getting the line of sight correct. I think that this camera angle might work a little bit better for the channeling live streams than it does for these response videos, but I'm all about experimenting, right? So if this is your first time watching my channel, I'm an ecologist, evolutionary biologist, and biogeologist currently working on my Ph.D. in biogeology at Lehigh University. I'm part of a paleontology team, work and do research in paleoinformatics, which is the application of data science to paleontology problems. Now, rather unusually for an evolutionary biologist, I'm also religious. I'm a Christian deist, and I am a spiritualist and a spiritualist medium, and hence the title of this show, The Science Medium. I believe in God because I think it's more likely than not that the simulation hypothesis is true and the realist hypothesis is false, and God is the computer on which the simulation runs. Now, of course, I don't mean a literal computer, but by analogy. Why do I believe in spirits? Well, I've had numerous paranormal encounters that I couldn't rationally explain, and when I compared my paranormal experiences to the paranormal experiences of others, I found that there was a great amount of consistency across these experiences, and that made it relatively unlikely that it was all in my head. So I subscribe to an epistemological standards according to which my belief in gods and spirits are justified. Rational skeptics, on the other hand, often hold to an epistemic standard that, if consistently applied, would render their position completely absurd in many cases. I'm going to give the usual caveat here, that even though I like making fun of rational skeptics and exposing problems with their movement, I am not here to make enemies with atheists. I was an atheist for 10 years. I completely get it. You can't choose your own beliefs. But if you have a certain epistemic standard and you think that other people should have the same epistemic standard, and according to that epistemic standard, they should conclude that God doesn't exist, well, then you better be willing to investigate your epistemic standard with all of the possible academic rigor. So today we're going to look at perhaps my favorite provider of rational skeptic cringe content, RationalityRules. Now, RationalityRules' whole shtick is about calling out logical fallacies with these cute little icons whenever he spots one. So I'm going to adopt a similar style today, and probably in the future as well, where I'm going to call out logical fallacies by name. Now, here are 3 logical fallacies that you may want to keep in mind for this video. So the first of these is well poisoning. And well poisoning occurs when you introduce an idea to your audience that biases them toward not taking the idea or opponent seriously. So calling religion a fairy tale when you're talking about religion is an example of a well poisoning fallacy. Another common logical fallacy is the straw man fallacy. In the straw man fallacy, you misrepresent what your opponent is saying. You make a simpler version of it or a sillier version of it, and you refute that rather than what the person is actually saying. And the third logical fallacy is that of the false dilemma. When you say, it must be either A or B, it can't be A, therefore B. Like, that's a perfectly logically valid argument, but the first premise is false. It's either A or B, but it could also be C or D. So you're hiding those possibilities, thus creating the false dilemma fallacy. So keep those fallacies in mind as Rationality Rules tries to debunk mediumship itself in his video, New Age Channelers Debunked. And I'm going to show you the thumbnail first because in the thumbnail itself he has his mediums wearing dunce caps, thereby well poisoning before he's even said a word. Now let's get into the video itself.
Welcome to New Realities.
You know, because there's more than one reality.
Look, I know we're being facetious here, but yes, there are many interpretations under which there's more than one reality. If by reality you mean universe, then in a multiversal scenario there are infinitely many realities. If you mean hypersensory realities, so stuff that's part of this universe but exists beyond our senses, well, we've talked about those realities before on this channel, and I think there's a compelling case to be made that hypersensory realities exist. I'm back to this set because it's just too hard to do it from the chair.
My name is Alan Steinfeld, and on this program I'd like to explore the possibilities of who we are as an evolving, spiritually connected race on this planet.
Spiritually connected? Brilliant. We're already head deep in woo-woo.
Here's our first instance of a well poisoning fallacy. This person is introducing his topic using some fairly flowery language, espousing what seems like a pantheist view, which is certainly a reasonable view to hold, and right off the bat, spiritually connected pantheism is woo-woo.
Today's guest is someone who's devoted a lot of time and energy into explaining the process of this evolution, and he's a channel for Bashar. Daryl Anka is the guest, and he will be channeling Bashar, who is a consciousness from another time and space. From another time and space.
Yeah, you heard that right. Daryl Anka asserts to be able to channel a multi-dimensional, futuristic being called Bashar into his body, who can then, as we're about to see, communicate with us.
So there are a diversity of opinions on what channeling is. There are those who hold a purely materialist understanding of channeling, according to which the channeled entities represent Jungian archetypes in the collective unconscious, and then we're sort of just bringing out these hidden elements of our psychology. So that's sort of like a Levian interpretation. And then there are those who would say, well, these are beings that exist in the hypersensory reality that are interacting with us to communicate messages. That's my view. And then there are those who, presumably what this person believes, that they exist in hyperdimensional space, right? So another plane on the multiverse, and are interacting with us somehow. I personally think that is the least plausible account.
Okay, thanks. This is exciting. I don't think anyone's ever actually channeled on the program during the interview, but no, go ahead. 2 hours later. $2,000 years later.
Okay, this goes on for ages, and it's awkward, boring, and in my case, damn infuriating. And so, for all our sakes, I'll skip it.
So generally, channeling requires going into some kind of trance-like state in order to be receptive to what signals are being sent your way. So, for each person it's different. For me, it takes a minute or two if I'm in the right mode to get into the place where I channel. I'm sure for this guy it might take longer. But notice how he's using clips from SpongeBob, an inherently silly cartoon show. I know people have a real fondness for SpongeBob. I was a little bit too old for that when it started. But this is another instance of subtle well poisoning. The channeling process is akin to a silly children's show.
I'll say good day to you this day of your time. How are you?
Very good. Thank you so much for being here.
It is our pleasure always to co-create these transmissions with each and every one of you.
So notice there his subtle slurring of his speech. Now, if you've seen my channeling live streams, typically every Sunday night at the time I'm recording this video, you'll know that I also often slur my words when I am in the state of channeling. And I think that that's probably a good piece of corroborating evidence that he's having a genuine channeling experience, however we choose to interpret that, rather than that he is lying.
New Age channeling debunked. So within the intro I covered just one channeler, that being Daryl Anker, but he's not a special case. There are tens of thousands of people all over the world who claim to be able to channel all sorts of entities. Here's Barbara Marciniak pretending to be, channeling a Pleiadian alien.
Good afternoon. We are here, and once again, it is our great pleasure to be in your reality.
Well-poisoning fallacy. Also observe again the classic slur that occurs when a person is in a channeling trance. Again, this is another piece of evidence to suggest that it's genuine and not pretending. Studies of religious trances show that it is clearly distinct from pretending. I just want to give another piece of validity to this woman's experience, because that phrase, I am here, we are here, like that is a phrase that pops into my head almost every time I do a channeling.
Now, most of these channelers make an enormous amount of money from books, videos, lectures, and personal sessions, and this brings me to a somewhat facetious point that I'd like to make. Don't you think it's strange that these celestial, multi-dimensional beings need ridiculous amounts of paper that only have value to one species on one planet? Weird, right?
That would be capitalism. I know your question was half facetious, but it deserved a half facetious answer.
I mean, on Anker's website alone, he has over 100 digital downloads that each net him between $10 and $40 per sale. He sells crystals for $200, and he makes $20 for each sale of his movie. And I've only just scratched the surface. Even Scranton, who has a measly 3.4k subs, charges $222 for 75 minutes of his time, $15 for his ebook, and $3,888 for a yearly membership. Seriously, these people are making bank.
I'm going to make a promise to you right now that I am never going to take any money for channeling work unless it involves incurring an expense on my part. I view this as something analogous to a pastoral calling. However, I may include a Patreon on this channel, and I may include a link in the description. I haven't decided yet about how you can donate to my lab if you think it would be good to have people of diverse religious opinions working in science.
So beneath the facade, what exactly are channelers asserting? What are they claiming to be true? Well, it depends on the channeler, but they all, at the very least, assert that they can enter a state in which they can transmit information from another entity, that they're telepathic.
Again, there's a variety of opinions on this. I wouldn't go so far as to say telepathy. What I understand things are is, look, we know that there are ways to induce certain moods, thoughts, feelings in other people using sound waves, using electromagnetic stimulation. And so it's reasonable to believe that when I'm in the more receptive state and there are beings from the hypersensory reality trying to communicate with me, they're interacting with my brain in the heightened state using maybe not telepathy, but subtle sound waves or subtle electromagnetic inductions to give me signals which my mind then interprets. There's a lot of interpretation in channeling. It's rarely very clear, though sometimes it is. It's a lot of thoughts and feelings and impressions that I'm trying to interpret.
But here's the thing. Telepathy has never been demonstrated under controlled scientific conditions, not once. Not by shamans, witch doctors, theocrats, or New Agers. It's got as much evidence in its favour as does the assertion that humans can levitate. None. And this is just the assertion of telepathy.
We've talked about the problems about demonstrating paranormal claims before. So the problem with proving scientifically paranormal claims is that for it to count as scientific, it has to have a big spike. Whatever you're studying, it has to be at least 2 points above the mean in terms of standard deviation for it to count. And then, even if such a spike in data did occur, we have documented evidence showing that confirmation bias affects the scientists and peer review people, and they'd likely reject it, even if presented with evidence. However, we also know that confirmation bias means that people are more likely to embrace debunkings of the paranormal, even if those studies are of poor quality.
Channelers make many more assertions on top of this hogwash. For example, watch how many assertions Anchor makes within the following sentence alone.
The connection process, as I understand it, is kind of a telepathic contact.
So there's the assertion that telepathy is both possible and that he can perform it.
Note that this man said that that was how he understood it. He's probably not in a position of being terribly rigorous with his words. This is what he thinks is going on. He even says as much. He's not making the positive claim that, yes, this is telepathy, and yes, I can perform it. He's like, this is what it seems like to me. And so by omitting that, you're engaging in a straw man fallacy.
And what I've been trained to do is change the frequency of my own brainwaves.
There's the assertion that the human brain has special frequencies and that he can deliberately change his frequencies, which are both utterly unfounded claims.
Brainwave frequencies are a thing? And again, he's probably using imprecise language to describe an analogous concept. You can change your brainwave patterns by relaxing. Also, this is still a straw man.
To be something closer to the level on which they exist.
There's the subtle assertion that a being called Bashar exists, and that by extension, Bashar's race, planet, universe, and dimension exists, which are all insultingly vacuous claims.
I'm sure he does believe that Bashar exists, but I've already mentioned that there's disagreement about what it means to exist among spiritualists in this context.
And at the same time, Bashar will do the same thing from his end.
There's the assertion that Bashar can also perform telepathy.
I'm not sure if it's fair to call it telepathy for a spiritual being.
So that somewhere in the middle, the brainwave frequencies meet and lock together.
I'm sorry, but if this bullshit doesn't stick in your throat, you'll swallow it all. This is a ridiculous assertion that, guess what, hasn't been remotely scientifically proven.
If I speak to you in a relaxed manner and I am also relaxed, and we were both hooked up to electroencephalograms, our brainwaves would start to sync up just through the act of verbal communication. Now imagine other subtle ways of communication and how that might influence coming together of our syncing up of our brainwaves. Also, again, this is how he's describing it. It's not a hard assertion.
And what you then get is his thoughts translating into the language that I obviously was raised to understand, which is English. He's not speaking, he's just sending thoughts, but I'm translating that because our wavelengths are synchronized.
The assertion that he can translate Bashar's language.
So this is the most absurd straw man of them all. The man clearly said that from his perspective, he's receiving thoughts and he's interpreting them in his own language. He's not saying he's hearing Bashar's language and translating it into English like he's some kind of living Google Translate.
Honestly, none of what Anchor just asserted is true. None of it. It's all hogwash. And no, I'm not being closed-minded. I'm actually caring about the truth of claims rather than if they just make me feel warm, fuzzy, and special.
Well, you are being closed-minded, but more to the point, we also care about truth. We just disagree about what the truth is, And what is the standard by which we try to learn truth, if it's possible for us to know truth at all?
So if channeling doesn't have any science in its favour, what does it have? Why do people find it, and New Age mysticism altogether, so compelling? Well, like all religious phenomenon, it's due to the fact that we simply haven't biologically evolved to be a rational species. We're a power-seeking mammalian ape that's absolutely terrified of death, and the fact that the entire universe doesn't revolve around us. And this makes us extremely susceptible to confirmation bias, arguments from ignorance, psychological manipulation, scientific illiteracy, and incorrectly interpreting our experiences.
It's very likely that our senses are only tuned to what is immediately useful to us, and that it does not accurately describe the universe at all. And because of that, our scientific instruments have probably been corrupted. So even our scientific instruments don't get us any more to the truth of things than any other method does. And by the way, if things exist that only interact with us minimally, even if they're living on this planet, we might not evolve the ability to perceive them, especially if it requires that we have to be in a particular conscious state, or we have to develop an extra sense in order to perceive them. I've done a whole video on this. It's the evolutionary argument for spirits. Please check that out after this video.
For example, let's start with confirmation bias, the tendency to search for, interpret, favour and recall information that confirms our beliefs.
And scientists, including those who edit the peer-reviewed journals, are demonstrably guilty of it.
Unfortunately, it's extremely likely that believers in channeling have already stopped watching this video because it doesn't support their beliefs.
No man, I'm sticking in this to the end, and probably after.
They've written me and this video off as ill-informed and obnoxious.
It is ill-informed, and it is obnoxious, but I'm sticking around anyway.
Furthermore, because many believers in channeling have invested a significant amount of their time, money and energy into the belief, at least some of them will be committing an almost subconscious sunk cost fallacy. They, like many pastors, priests and ministers, are justifying further investment into the belief simply because they feel that the resources they've already invested will otherwise be lost.
Look, by being open about my position in my career and doing this pastoral work as a channeler and medium, statistically I am actually damaging my career. I have everything to lose by being out about my faith, and I would have everything to gain renouncing it, becoming a skeptic. I do this, I'm out about my beliefs, because I think it's important to know, I think it's important to let people know that you can be a science enthusiast, you can work in science without having to be an atheist, or if you have a faith, being private about that faith. I think it's good representation to be both a scientist and completely open about my religious belief, even though statistically I am probably hurting my career by doing so. What is the skeptic risking? I know the skeptic might be risking something if it's specifically God skepticism, but skepticism of mediumship is already the majority position in society.
Moving on, and to emphasise what I think is the main cause of New Age spirituality altogether, let alone channeling, is scientific illiteracy. And the reason for this is because not understanding science makes one susceptible to pseudoscience.
This is the subtle assertion that all people who believe in spirits are scientifically illiterate. Not only is this well-poisoning and insulting, Rationality Rules, you have no scientific credentials whatsoever. I have a master's degree, and in the next couple of years I'm going to have a Ph.D. This isn't an appeal to authority, but it's an appeal to, if I'm scientifically illiterate, what does that make you? Like, this is the fundamental problem with the skeptic movement, is assuming that everyone who doesn't agree with them is stupid, and there's nothing you can say that will change their minds, because once you admit you believe in God or you believe in spirits, no matter what you've accomplished, you are stupid to them. You are one of the useless eaters.
To repeat what I've stated in another video, the whole New Age movement is entirely predicated on dispensing meaningless drivel as if it was profound truth and wisdom.
The brainwave frequencies meet and lock together.
What the fuck are you saying?
It is the combination of scientific sounding words with New Age words to create the illusion that they're somehow related.
Never say that I'm unfair. Those are valid criticisms of the New Age movement generally.
It is the attempt to equivocate the spooky and perplexed aspects of physics with New Age intuitions by subtly implying that because physics is spooky and difficult to understand, but nevertheless true, so must be New Age intuitions.
Physics isn't spooky, it's just unbearably boring. Like perhaps the one subject worse than cancer biology.
And while we're on the topic of deception, let's talk about psychological manipulation. One of the most common assertions that believers in channeling make is that a certain channeler has revealed personal information about them, and that the only way they could have known such information is if they really were channeling another entity. Which, by the way, is an excellent example of the argument from ignorance fallacy. After all, how else could these channelers know such personal information? Well, to provide but two explanations, likewise to conjurers, stage performers and psychics, many channelers utilise hot reading and cold reading to dumbfound their audience.
Notice the well poisoning there. Also, I'm going to bring up that argument from ignorance thing again in a couple minutes. Also look, in order for cold reading to work, you usually need a large crowd, unless you're like Sherlock Holmes level ability of reading people. But I would just avoid any appearance of cold reading. I don't know why otherwise capable mediums are in the position where, because you know anything you say is going to be interpreted as cold reading, because the skeptic already assumes you're a fraud, so why give them any ammunition?
And finally, let's touch a little on personal experiences. When someone, such as myself, states that channeling is bullshit, very often those who have personally experienced channeling take that to mean that I'm saying that their experience is bullshit, that they didn't experience what they experienced, that they're a liar. But that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that while I accept that they had their experience, I don't accept their interpretation of their experience, and the difference is paramount. Like it or not, there's a reason why anecdotal evidence is considered the weakest form of evidence. It's not reliable because we can, and often are, mistaken.
I am happy that you at least admit that. You're not trying to invalidate our experience, but that you're trying to disagree with our interpretation of the experience. But here's the problem with the anecdotal fallacy. There's this idea that personal experience is invalid, even confirmed personal experience, because it's what I call epistemic democracy. If you imagine a world in which, say, 90% of the people on Earth are blind and 10% seeing, well, that 10% seeing is reduced to anecdotal evidence according to your standard. So the anecdotal fallacy is not necessarily a fallacy, especially when we're talking about unique perceptors. I spoke about this in my first ever video on the channel at my lecture at the Long Island Philosophical Society conference in 2019. Also, when you're talking about experiences, are you talking about the experience of people who have witnessed channeling? Or are you talking about people who have experienced the channeling phenomena firsthand as the channeler? Because you say something in a minute that makes me think that you're talking about people who are experiencing a channel like an audience member. Because those are very different experiences. It's one thing to experience it as an audience member. It's another thing to experience it as the channel, as the medium. However, if you want to regularly experience channeling as the audience member, feel free to stop by on our usually Sunday night live streams where I do channeling.
Don't you find it peculiar that all of these channeled gods, spirits, aliens and multi-dimensional entities have not once contributed to science?
I'm going to answer that, but before I do, even if I were to provide an answer, I suspect you would move the goalpost. You see, why would you expect spirits to know about science, right? Science being a completely human discipline concerning human phenomena. It's entirely possible that spirits have an entirely different perception of reality. Number two, spirits are generally not interested in science, right? Because they understand that the objects of science are illusory, And they will tell you that you need to be, if you want to develop spiritually, you need to understand the illusory nature of the objects of science. 3, and this is the goalpost moving thing, if I were to provide you with an example of a person who claimed that their scientific idea came from spirits, well, you'd say, well, those people are already scientists anyway, so it could just be their imagination. Of course, this ignores the fact that anyone who wasn't already a scientist probably wouldn't understand what they were being transmitted in the first place.
They haven't given us any inventions, discoveries, or cures for anything.
Alfred Russel Wallace claimed that he got his theory of evolution as a form of divine inspiration from the spirits. I take it you do like evolution and think it's correct, right?
All they've given us is wishy-washy, loose-weave assertions that are unfalsifiable, claims that can't be tested, and hence can't be proven false.
So this is one of those epistemic absurdities I was talking about. Firstly, falsifiable means testable, but you'd never be able to prove that it wasn't the case. A thing can be testable and verifiable, that is, you can confirm it in the affirmative, but you wouldn't be able to falsify it. Let me give you an example of a verifiable but not falsifiable claim: the existence of exoplanets. And indeed, there were people prior to the discovery of exoplanets who thought it was pseudoscientific. Why are exoplanets an unfalsifiable claim? Because if you didn't look at this star and, oh, there's no exoplanet here, and you looked at this one, oh, there's no exoplanet here, you'd have to look forever. You'd have to be omnipresent to prove that there are no exoplanets. And so, even though it has been verified, the claim that exoplanets exist is still today unfalsifiable. So, if you reject claims that are unfalsifiable, so you would have had to reject the position before the discovery of exoplanets that exoplanets existed, right? And most people were saying, oh, of course exoplanets exist. And right now, today, you should reject the claim that life exists elsewhere in the universe, because it's unfalsifiable, even though it almost certainly does occur.
It's strange, right? Or is it? If I wanted to make money from credulous people by pretending to have a telepathic connection with an extraterrestrial, I'd be damn sure that my assertions are unfalsifiable, because that way, no one could prove me false, and I'd be able to keep raking in the cash.
So if I predicted, let's say a week before a presidential election, that the polls were all wrong and that the election would be effectively a 50-50 split, that would be an unfalsifiable prediction that I couldn't stake my reputation on. We run these calculations and we see 2 for Biden, 1.5 for Trump. So what does that mean as regarding who's going to win? Well, 0.5 dignity is kind of a margin of error. So I would say that this is too close to call, and maybe there's an advantage, a natural advantage to Biden, but in reality, this election is going to be a 50-50 election. A lot of people have counted Trump out in this election cycle. There's lots of models, such as those by Nate Silverman, but there are plenty of other models that show that Trump at least has a decent shot. Go check out that video if you're interested.
Now, with all of this in mind, and especially the fact that there is no scientific evidence for telepathy, one must ask themselves, what is more likely? That the assertions of just a few of these channelers are correct, because they can't all be correct due to them contradicting one another.
Spiritual entities lie, number 1, and number 2, people often will interpret what the spirits tell them through their own paradigm. It is an interpretive thing, and that's why you get inconsistencies.
That these channelers are schizophrenic.
I knew we would get back to ableism. We always do. It's always something reactionary with these skeptics.
Or that these channelers are nasty, spineless charlatans who seek to build an empire on your gullibility.
And this is the false dilemma, or trilemma as the case may be, because even on his own account, he could think of other reasons, right? They could just genuinely be mistaken. But no, he rushes right to either mentally ill or charlatan. And that's what these skeptics always do. Everyone who disagrees with me is either mentally ill or a charlatan. I happen to think that probably most are having genuine channeling experiences, even if the information coming through isn't necessarily accurate. Yeah, so this is the part that makes me think that you were referring only to those who have experienced channeling, because you certainly are devaluing the experience of those who have actively experienced channeling as the channel, and you say, well, you're either mentally ill or you're lying.
Occam's razor, along with science, suggests the latter.
This has been another episode of the Science Medium Show here on Creepy Puppets Presents. Next week is Thanksgiving, so I'm gonna not do one of these review videos then. I think I'm gonna do a Thanksgiving special. And then I want to take a break from Rational Skeptics because they're very frustrating. Now I'm going to sort of turn my ire back to Christian fundamentalists. And in any case, if you want authentic channeling, come and visit us here Sunday nights where I do a channeling live stream. Take care.